In this video, I'd like to explore, just for fun, this question, does English even exist? And this sort of relates to the philosophical field of epistemology, which is the study of how we know the things we think we know. So just to wax philosophical for a second, can we say that English exists? Well, let's compare this to two other questions that seem like they're phrased similarly. Can we say that a table exists? And can we say that racism exists? So, with a table, I might approach this question by walking up to this table, and if you asked me, does it exist? I could touch it, I could tap on it, I could figure out its length and width, and I could, as confidently as anything else in the material world, through the phenomenon that I have, say this exists. Racism, can I say that racism exists? This is more of an indirect thing. So racism is not a thing that I can touch in and of itself. It's an abstract concept which I've posited, which collects together other things that can be seen or can be experienced, and then we group or collect by social agreement those experiences, those interactions, those things that can be encountered through the senses as all different instantiations of the same abstract concept. And so, which one of these is more similar to the question about English existing? You know, if you listen to a movie and someone asks you, what language is that? Like, oh, that's in English. That kind of presupposes like English exists because I can like walk up to the table and touch it. I can walk up to something and say, oh, yes, that is English. I hear it. My brain is activating. It's definitely real in the way that a table is. But in some ways, English is also a social construct. English exists because we've agreed to group together a set of pretty disparate phenomena, different ways of using language, and we've come to a sort of a general agreement. We call those things English and not other things, or those things are all in the category, or some of them are outside of it. And there's actually kind of a lot of borderline cases where we might just see it's a little bit more difficult to say what is English and what isn't English than we thought. And that can kind of throw into question this sort of idea like English is self evident or somehow exists, this language which I'm speaking and which you're listening to right now. And if it's a little bit unclear whether English itself exists, this also then kind of throws into question who counts as a speaker of English, which is definitely a sociological question, but we can also think of it as sort of a philosophical question too. Um, what minimal characteristics must someone meet in order to qualify or to count as a speaker or user of English? So if English does exist, who speaks it? Well, let's say that you were an anthropologist, and an anthropologist is trained to never write, this subject is a reincarnation of a monkey. What anthropologists are trained to do in their writing is to write dispassionately and to say, this subject believes himself to be the reincarnation of a monkey, or other people in the society act as if this person is a reincarnation of a monkey. Anthropologists are supposed to try to distance themselves from making a strong statement on the veracity of the claim and just to report claims as claims. Um, but when we say this person speaks English or this subject speaks English, we don't often stop to say this subject believes themselves to be a speaker of English, or other people agree or act as if this person is a speaker of English. We take them at their word. Yes, this person is an English speaker. This person speaks English. So, from anthropological speaking, there's no reason that we shouldn't question someone's claim to be an English speaker in the same way, or at least put ourselves in the space where we have room to ask those questions. What does one have to do to count? So, what could logically be true of a subject of whom it is claimed that they speak English? Here's three possibilities from Pateman. This is an old article, but the subject believes of the language that they speak that it is English. But this could be a problem for monolingual children who don't even necessarily know that there are other ways of speaking. They don't know that the way that they are speaking is called English because they've never encountered a different way of speaking that has any other name. In their mind, what they speak is just human language. It's not English. So that person could not then meet the test of being an English speaker according to that standard. It could be they indeed are speaking English, but it doesn't match the listener's preconception of what English is. And this reminds me of a time that I was in my master's program in TESOL at Michigan State University, and I was traveling with a Japanese student in my program named Ayako, and we stopped in a very small town in northern Michigan. And she went into the gas station and asked for something from the cashier, and he looked at her and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, if you're in America, you have to speak English with me." But she was speaking English, but just with her Japanese accent and maybe seeing her face, according to the man behind the counter, whatever it was that she was speaking didn't qualify as what was English in his conception. So, from a scientific perspective, from a linguist's standard, Ayako would have met the minimum requirements of being an English speaker, but from the man behind the counter, she wouldn't have. Or the subject believes of the X he speaks, or, in this case of the German he speaks, that they are indeed speaking English, but in fact, they speak another language. And this is the case of Broken, which is an English lexified Creole spoken on the Torres Strait Islands between the northeasternmost tip of Australia and Papua New Guinea. They learned English Maritime Creole, or an early form of English Maritime Creole, from traders who were traveling through those straits in the Coral Sea on their way to Indonesia and the Spice Islands. And they actually abandoned their indigenous languages in order to learn English Maritime Creole, which they adopted a variety of this as their language of the Torres Strait Islands, because of the prestige that English supposedly offered. The issue was that when the Torres Strait Islanders were speaking, when they met other English-speaking Australians, from the perspective of the Australians, the language that they were speaking, which they called English, was actually not English. What the Australians saw is like, oh, there's differences between the English lexified Creole that they're speaking and the variety of early Australian English that we're speaking. So they said, even though the Torres Strait Islanders insisted that they were speaking English, that claim was rejected by the Australians, who said no. And in this case, linguists would actually agree that the language they were speaking was not English, even though they called it English, that it was what we now call Torres Strait Islands Creole. But they themselves prefer to use the word broken, which they've reclaimed as the name for this language, because they were called by outsiders so often that they spoke broken English, that they actually adopted the name broken as the language name for themselves, that they use among themselves as sort of a way to gather power for themselves again. So these are all cases where it's interesting, where this tests for evaluating the claim that someone is an English speaker would fail. So this is where broken is spoken. These are Torres Strait Islanders and the Torres Strait Islands. This is what it sounds like if you're curious. The toto weabikese está underneath the house. So you can probably understand some of those words. The turtle, what I be catch him, is stop underneath the house. And what this means is the turtle I caught is under the house. So you can see it has some characteristics that are very common among Creoles, whichever language they're lexified from. Very similar grammatical structures, that any transitive verb is marked overtly as transitive here with this particle im, which is a transitive particle. It comes from the English word him. The turtle I caught, we definitely have the complementizer overt here, we, which is what, the turtle what I be kese im, that I be kese him. With be is a aspect marker for a completed aspect. So Creoles the world over use aspect and not tense. So we see some of these characteristics of Creole. Bala blomi ibiguan. I don't know if you can make a guess about what that is, but this is my brother is big, and it literally comes from brother belong me is a big one. Brother belong me is big. Again, we don't have a possessive determiner, but we use a preposition, brother of me. That's very common for Creoles word over. I'ma bin look one small girl, where bin sit down, cry, cry, cry. So, mom bin look is, again, we've got an aspect marker here of a completed action that still has relevance for the current story. Look was see. One small girl, where bin. That E is a subject marker, a subject pronoun, a universal subject pronoun for what she has. Bin sit down, again, we've got an aspect marker here. cry, 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 so that we show ongoing aspect by using reduplication, repeating that. That's something you see a lot in the Creoles of the world. How come you sabe bakmento? This is why do you know? This is their own term for their own language. That's you can see where it derives from, but sabe is an interesting word. This comes from saber, which was borrowed into English maritime Creole from Spanish-speaking mariners. And you kind of think of the pirate movies where they say savvy for do you know, which comes from Spanish saber. And or French savoir. Actually, there's pirates from either of those, but in English Maritime Creole, this was the word for to know in the sense of to know how to do something. In Tok, we see Tok is also the name of the national language of Papua New Guinea, which is called Tok Pisin, which was derived from the words talk pigeon. That's the name of their language. We don't have to look just into the modern world. This is an example of a language called Scots or Scoots, which is a cousin of English. It derives from a common ancestor of English, but it isn't an English variety per se. This was spoken in the lowlands of Scotland. It's a Germanic language. It shows more influence of Old Norse than English, but it grew up side by side English, so they're cousins. They switched back and forth, and there are still Scots speakers today. Actually, there's a revival of the Scots language going on. You can learn about it, but this is what it sounds like. It's a very interesting language. There's some things you can understand and some things you can't. And where any linguist would say this is definitely not English, if you try to have a standard measure of mutual comprehensibility, how much of it can you understand? Well, you probably understand enough of what is going on here, especially if you sort of visualize a strong Scottish accent in your head, that this might meet the standard for mutual comprehensibility, where we would say that English and Scots are dialects of each other, are dialects of the same language. And so that kind of interestingly complicates, does this count as English or not? This is a primary school student from the Scots-speaking area of Scotland, and this person is writing in English. This is Lowland Scottish English. It's not Scots, although you can see some influence of Scots. Every linguist would say now this is a variety of English, whereas what was before Scots was a different language. This is English because it's a Scottish influenced way of speaking the English language. And yet you will see that this sixth grader, the way they're writing the story, there's a lot of aspects that you could tell that this is not the way that an American English speaker would understand English. He's a bonny wee dog, right, for a pretty small dog, or a good looking small dog. She's white with a wee bit of brown, right? So she's white with a little bit of brown, right? She aye sleeps on the couch. She always sleeps on the couch. So she aye barks. She always barks. So you can see this is now, there's variety differences within the English language family that people would still count English, but it may not be all that obvious. And if you were an alien from another planet, why is this one not English and this one is? This becomes a trickier question to begin to answer. So what is English? Can something be empirically measured to determine whether or not it is English? If we try to accept an empirical standard, it puts us in an awkward position because it runs up against people's beliefs. People might believe that what they speak is English, but it might somehow embarrassingly fail to meet the scientific standard you set up, or it might include things as English that the people who speak it would believe, no, this is not English. This is something different. This is something else. Tok Pisin, like I mentioned before, the national language of New Guinea. It'd be interesting. I have a link there. You can look at actually the Tok Pisin broadcasts of the Australian Broadcasting Company and listen to it. And you kind of are on the verge of this uncanny valley of almost understanding everything they're saying, but yet not understanding. You're kind of like, you think you're understanding it, but then you listen for a while and you realize, oh, I don't know what they were just talking about. So that's an interesting case of Tok Pisin. Is English just a political construct? Is it merely a social construct? Well, and if it is this a top-down political construct? Are there people in power who decide what English is and what isn't in order to protect their power? In small ways, probably this is true. There isn't an official board of the English language the way that there are for some languages. There's no official set of gatekeepers, but at many different places and many different times, there are people who make decisions about whether something is acceptable English or not. And in this class, Structure of English, this is the awkward position that we find ourselves in a lot of time, is being faced with these decisions of do I say that this is acceptable English or not, and on what basis, and how do I explain that to the learners? Is English just a social construct, something that from the bottom up has sort of emerged over time, that people just come to agreement on what counts as English and what doesn't? And in some ways, this is true, but any social construct, any bottom up social construct, there's also going to be a lack of agreement. What one group of people might agree this is English, another group of people might agree that it isn't. And yet, all humans agree that some form of English does exist, that this is one of the first languages that people the world over think of when they're asked to list languages. It has some political reality, some social reality, probably some philosophical reality as well. What isn't English? This would be another question that we could ask. And as I mentioned before in this video, linguists try to use measures of mutual comprehensibility, set a standard that if you can understand less than 80% of what someone is saying, it's not English. And yet, many Americans would find the English spoken on the Scottish Isles to be less than 80% mutually comprehensible, but for political and social reasons want to say, no, that is the same language. Swedish and Norwegian are two languages where they definitely understand more than 80% of each other, yet for political and social reasons insist that are different languages, have different entities, are a different political and a different social reality. And then we've got interlanguages, the things that English learners produce on their way towards gaining mastery over whatever they call English and are aiming at. If I was a monolingual Chinese speaker, how I would speak after 1 month in England, after 6 months, after 1 year, after 3 years, after 5 years, this would be an evolving model of the English language. The English coming out of my mouth would change over this time frame. And so this would be an interlanguage that's changing. And even after 5 years, there would still probably scientifically provable differences between the English that would come out of my mouth or out of my keystrokes compared to the people in the community that I live. But what I want to say that the one is not a speaker of English just because there's demonstrable differences. What I say, it's a variety of English, an interlanguage variety of English. These are political questions.